Okay, so welcome to this very special Dogworth and Bechdel Test Fest partnership event for Stray, and I'm so completely thrilled to be joined by filmmaker Elizabeth Lowe, who put this beautiful, beautiful film out into the world. Thank you so much for joining us, Elizabeth. I've had such wonderful feedback about this film and how it's really provided an escape for people at this time. So I'm so pleased that we can speak to you today.
Oh, I'm so happy to be here, and I'm so glad that it's a solace or a salve for people during this pandemic in their own homes.
Yes, thank you. So I'm going to ask a few questions to you now. We have the Q&A function live, so for people tuning in, wherever you are, please do feel free to send your questions in, and we'll do our best to relay them to Elizabeth in the second half of this this half hour. But just start things off, Elizabeth, could I ask how you found yourself in Istanbul and crossing paths with these wonderful narrators that you've discovered?
Yeah, I was really interested originally, before I made the film, to do a global study of how stray dogs are treated in different cultural contexts. So I was researching about which countries had the largest stray dog populations, and India, Nepal, and Turkey, and Russia, all these countries came up. But when I read about the history of Turkey's relationship with stray dogs, I was hooked, because I think it was in 1910, when the Ottoman Empire was sort of crumbling. Unfortunately, a British diplomat came to Istanbul, and he was chased by a pack of stray dogs, and he fell to his own death. But in retaliation, the British government forced the Turkish one to round up all of their unattended dogs and banish them to this island where they starved to death. And then shortly afterwards, huge fires broke out throughout Istanbul because no dogs were there to warn the citizens. And then World War I happened. And so a lot of Turkish Istanbulites saw the exiling of the dogs as a curse on the country and the city. And so over the next 100 years, even as the government tried to eradicate stray dogs from the streets in this attempt to sort of modernize their cities, people in 2004 managed to fight for the rights of dogs, where it's now illegal to euthanize or kill any healthy stray dog, or even hold them in captivity, which I was really struck by how radical and progressive these laws are as someone who's a foreigner to Turkey. And so that is what made me want to go to Istanbul. And so my first time going to Turkey and Istanbul was because of this production. And then when we were there, pretty early on, we came across Zeytin and Nazar. They were in a really busy underground tunnel, and they were streaking past all these people. And it really piqued our interest, because we wondered, like, where do these stray dogs have to go? What appointments do they have to keep with? Because they don't have work, they don't have family, they don't have property. So we were really intrigued. And they ended up being on the heels of the young Syrian men who become featured prominently in the film, this on and off again relationship that was really beautiful to me, the comfort and sense of belonging that the young men saw in the dogs.
Yes,
So that's
absolutely.
how,
Fantastic. I mean, we have a lot to answer for, so in this respect.
I know. Unfortunately.
Sorry about that. I know. Oh no. And then how did your relationship develop with these dogs? And also I'd love to know some of the logistics of how you kind of kept track of them, but without, because you obviously don't want to interfere too much. So how did that collaboration work?
Yeah, so before heading out to Turkey, knowing that I was going to be filming with stray dogs who don't have handlers, and I wouldn't be able to, send call sheets to the dogs to tell them to show up at what hour and what place, I knew that I would have to go out with tracking devices somehow. So we got sponsored by this company called Tractive GPS, and they have these tiny sort of square GPS trackers that you can clip onto a dog collar. And so at the end of every day, we would just put these dog collars on with a tracking device that would allow us to be able to track the movements of the dogs through our phones. And so the next morning we'd be able to find them again. And it would be incredible, because I'd wake up and see that Zeytin had actually, wandered, throughout the night into different districts. And it was really interesting to think of sort of like the secret life of dogs. And then I guess technically also, when we were just filming with them, we didn't orchestrate or stage or do anything. Like literally the concept of the film and our production process was just sort of showing up to where Zeytin and Nazar were and then waiting for them to wake up. And sometimes Zayton wouldn't wake up until like 5 p.m., especially if she felt it was hot or something. And there was nothing we could do to try to prod her to get up, which I loved, because then really it was this process of like letting go of the narrative and letting go of my own impulses of what a story should be or what a film production should look like. And she really sort of just led us through the city. And she was one of the only dogs who was so not self-conscious in front of the camera and not reactive to me in a way that a lot of other dogs were, that she allowed us to follow her. And we didn't sort of interrupt her in any way. We tried to be like recording her life as authentically as we could, and all the sort of conversations that were happening around her too.
And what do you think that the dogs that you were tracking brought out in the people that they encountered?
It was so moving to me because I come from Hong Kong, or in the States where I live, where people are not used to, I'm not used to the idea of dogs just being free agents on their own, where they're not accountable to anyone and nobody specific is responsible to them. And so to see the way that Zayton would sort of move through the city and like just decide to sit next to a couple by the Bosphorus, and then the couple would just pet her a little bit. Or if people didn't like her, they would just shoo her away and she'd go on her way. It was interesting. Like some people, I think the relationship that a lot of Turks seem to have with the dogs was they saw them almost just like human strangers. Like sometimes you might be really nice to a human stranger, or you might not care about them at all. So that was the sense that I got from the way Zayton was perceived in the city. And she went actually by different names. Different people had different names for her than what the young Syrian men had given her, which is Zayton, which means olive in Turkish.
Do you know what any of the other names were? Did you kind of
Yeah.
have
Yeah. Oh, I don't remember. There were Turkish words that I couldn't remember, but they were really cute. I don't. Yeah, unfortunately, I don't remember.
I like that. I like how they kind of project their own ideas and
Yeah.
their own names and what she kind of symbolized to them, which was lovely.
Yeah.
You were cinematographer on the film as well. How did you decide how this film was going to look?
So we went out. I knew that the production value, I wanted it to be high and I wanted it to be beautiful and seductive, because I wanted audiences to get over that hump that you might have in relating to another species that doesn't speak, and the film isn't speaking for. So I knew that the visual appearance of the film had to draw you in. Like when you're close up to Zayton's face or watching her from behind her ears, I wanted audiences to project onto her sort of the same richness of inner life that you would project onto an independent actress in a independent fiction film. So we went out with this Alexa camera that, you know, filming stray dogs with such high-end equipment felt strange, but also I wanted to give her that sense of gravity. And also we used vintage Cook lenses that give it this sort of vignette look. And part of that was because I felt like I was capturing a moment in history and time where stray dogs have managed to slip through the cracks of modernization and somehow are still thriving in this really modern city that's Istanbul. So for me, it was like a capturing this moment that hopefully continues on for years to come, but you just never know. Like in 20, 30 years, if Turkey becomes much wealthier, will they still have this tolerance for the dogs? Even though it does feel very much like a part of the culture there to
Yeah.
tolerate them and embrace them.
it it is quite startling to see the difference in cultural attitudes towards the dogs,
Mm-hmm.
certainly in terms of how Istanbul treats them in comparison to, I mean, I'm speaking purely from the UK, but I know that the US as well has a completely different
Yeah.
treatment of dogs. Japan as well, I know have a very different attitude towards dogs. And I guess if people were wondering how you might actively help to shift those attitudes, I mean, do you have any resources or advice or something that you could relay from your experience of making this film?
I mean, for me, what I've grown to be really passionate about over these last few years in making this film and becoming familiar with this totally new way of relating to dogs that was foreign to me, where they're communally cared for instead of individually. And of course, people in Turkey have pets as well. But so many dogs, I think, in the West, like in, I don't know about the UK, but at least in the US, so many dogs languish in shelters, for the rest of their lives, if they're lucky enough to be in a no-kill shelter. And seeing how free and how rich and glorious the lives of stray dogs can be when they're allowed to live life on their own terms, and they learn how to navigate traffic, and they learn how to find food, and the government does provide food for them every day at feeding stations, that there is this third path there that's not just incarceration or death if you don't have an owner, that maybe they could just live on our margins, like off of our trash and feeding stations, the way that they do in Turkey, and the way that I feel like dogs are evolved to. But I don't know whether you can convince a city that's already sort of morally reframed that idea of having stray dogs live among you as being immoral and like quote unquote uncivilized. But yeah, I would hope that the film can be used to empower communities that do have stray dogs to to see the value in this way of life before turning their backs on the dogs, or believing that the only relationship you can have with dogs is through ownership.
It does feel like it feels like a shift in the conversation, at least, hopefully for Western audiences, definitely.
Yeah.
um I'd love to know a little bit more about how you got the film made. Was it I mean the logistics, right, but was it easy to get support for this film and to put it out into the
Uh,
world?
no, it was really tough, as you can probably imagine, being like, oh, this is a film about, humanity through the eyes of dogs, or just we're going to leave the narrative up to these dogs. It was a really tough pitch for funders. Um, and even some responses that I got, which I found pretty offensive, was like people would ask, oh, how can you tell a story about Turkey and this celebration of stray culture when there's so many human rights abuses there, or women's rights abuses? And that felt so reductive to me, that like every single story that comes out of a country has to conform to Western, like sort of has to perpetuate Western beliefs or stereotypes about particular countries like Turkey. So it was really tough, and I had to go out with my own savings to get a sample tape to sort of show this idea of a film that was really hard to articulate on paper. But then through that sample tape, we were able to get the support of organizations like IFP Film Week, where we were pitching the film, and where I actually met Ali Harbatol from Dog Wolf, who was really supportive of the film over the years. And finally, they came on board as our sales agent and were able to sell it to different territories around the world. And then also we got all these equipment grants from Rooftop Homes, and then like we got small grants throughout.
Yeah,
Yeah.
from the partners, like it's a good partnership given that it was Douglas.
Yeah, I know. I always knew. I always
You couldn't
knew.
make it up.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to come to some questions from the people who are very generously watching this Q&A today. So we've got an anonymous question. Do you think or know if humans' behavior towards the dogs was at time different because there was a camera and it was a film setting?
Yeah, this question has come up a lot, but I really don't think people behaved differently towards the dogs, that they would have acted kinder to the dogs because of the camera. Even when I was out just eating food without the camera, I noticed the way that Turks were treating the dogs, and it was very similar to how they are in the film. Yeah.
I like that. It just feels a bit more authentic, doesn't it? If
Mm-hmm.
that's the case. We've got a question from Dan Stockman. There was a really powerful human narrative running alongside the dog stories. How did you go about securing access and also gaining their trust as well?
It's interesting because the people are very peripheral to Zayton's story, as they weave in and out, as she weaves in and out of different people's lives. And it was literally Zayton who led us to those people. And I would show up to, people in the film who have relationships with her, or are just passing her by and having conversations around her. And I would just be filming her, and then we would sort of explain to them that, oh, this is a film about what a dog sees and hears. And I think maybe because I was so clearly an outsider and couldn't understand Turkish, that people really let their guards down. Um, and also because the film is about something that feels as innocuous as dogs, that people didn't mind. letting us film with them. And then with the boys, we were, I think, very bound by our mutual love and respect for Zayton and Nazar. And so they were really open from the very beginning.
Oh, wonderful. We have a question from Helen Morley. Terribly sentimental question, but does Elizabeth know what happened to the puppy that the young boys took after going to the police?
So that was one of the big ethical dilemmas of the production when the young men sort of stole Kartal from the construction site. Zainab, my co-producer, and I wondered, should we intervene? Do we return Kartal back to his family on the construction site, or even adopt Kartal into Zainab's home? Because it was clear that the puppy was sort of suffering under the care of the young men who lived very itinerant lives. But then all these questions popped up, like what would the emotional impact be of taking away this puppy from these boys who are equally displaced and uncomfortable, and obviously were seeking out a dog to add to their pack and to care for something or someone other than themselves, even despite how harsh their own circumstances were. And then also we didn't know that we thought about whether Kartal's life could maybe she would grow up to be like Zayton and Nazar, sort of have a really independent life, and maybe that would be better than her just sort of growing up on this construction site as part of a dog gang that was less social. But before we could make any decision, the police intervened and the young men were released after 48 hours. But when we went to ask the police where had the puppy gone, they gave us all sorts of answers that weren't true, like, oh, we dropped him off the shelter and we checked all the shelters. He never showed up there. So we actually have no idea what happened to Kartal, although I suspect that because Kartal is so cute, that a policeman just took Kartal in and gave it to his family or something, but just didn't want to tell us because technically that's not legal.
Okay.
That's my hope. But
yeah, just a sneaky policeman, we hope, is there.
Yeah, I hope so.
Is where that went.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you, as somebody who's seen a lot of Istanbul that perhaps a lot of people haven't, through the eyes of a narrator that no one else has probably seen, how would you describe Istanbul from your experience?
It's become one of my favorite cities. I would recommend everyone travel to there if you haven't already. It's this place that's like this bridge between the East and the West. And I don't know, the culture is really warm. Like when I would be filming with the dogs for hours crouched on the street, restaurant workers would come out and drop cups of tea off on the sidewalk for me on the curb, which is the kind of a level of hospitality I was not used to. And it's just the streets are beautiful and really cinematic. Everything feels like the whole city is cobblestone in my mind. And then dogs and cats wandering around everywhere, and then seagulls overhead. It's just a really dynamic and diverse city, like beyond just ethnic diversity, but even in terms of species.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Oh, lovely. A question from Beth Fellini. I was drawn to the plight of the Syrian boys and teenagers and how the community seemed more warm to the dogs than the boys who had clearly experienced trauma. The idea of communal care of strays seems to not extend to the boys and other refugees. Could I ask what happened to the boys? Are there any resources and support that they could be linked to?
Yeah, this is something that people often point out to me, that they feel when watching the film that the dogs seem to be treated better than the young men. But from my experience, and I also hope it comes through in the film, I think there's a lot of love and warmth for all tiers of society in the places that I filmed. Because even when those security guards are ousting the boys from the abandoned home, they're still patting them on the back and like giving them almost fatherly advice, like stop smoking, stop sniffing glue. And then the fact that they are talking about the young men and speculating about their lives, the security guards, and even the good Samaritans who pass by as the young men are begging, the guy who comes over and is like, oh, you should go back to Syria and get an education, even if that advice is misguided.
Yeah.
It felt very much like there was this level of warmth and concern for the boys that I don't know whether it would necessarily exist in other contexts. And a lot of Turks that I did ask, how do you feel about the refugee situation? Because Turkey has the largest refugee population in the world, it was not a political question for them. Like it wasn't something that politicians could leverage to create anti, immigrant fervor. because people would mostly reply to me, oh, they're our brethren, like they need help. And so Turkey is the haven for them right now. And so I was struck by that. And I see a continuation of this culture that has embraced stray dogs and is also, in some ways, even if infrastructure is severely lacking there, allowing, at least physically, refugees to at least be there in a way that most of Western Europe is more hostile. So
Yeah.
that's how I felt about that. And then what happened to the boys? Um, I think they're still living their lives as usual. They're living on the streets of Istanbul still. Um, and we are trying, are there resources and support that they could be linked to? We are trying to do impact fundraising screenings for, first we're doing one for the Animal Rights Federation in Turkey, because this dogs and animal rights is something that the film is much closer to. But then for our second and third impact screenings, we're hoping that we can organize ones that also address the needs of refugees in Istanbul. But that's also an area that I have been less sort of well researched in, so I didn't want to
Mm.
just go in and like be like, okay, here's a charity to donate to. But
Yeah,
we're
of
we're trying to
course.
develop plans for that.
That's great. That's fantastic. Just if people are watching as well, if you do go to stray-dog.co.uk, there are resources and pointers as to what you can help do if you've been affected or impacted by what you've seen in the documentary. I wanted to step outside of the doc for a little bit because you've got a whole body of short films as well that have dealt with a myriad of themes, mass incarceration, low-income families in Silicon Valley, bison culling as well. Like a
Yeah.
real kind of variation of themes and topics. But what is it that draws you to a story in the first place?
I think I have to believe that it's worthy of our screen time, that it's somehow maybe overlooked, and that I want to use my skills as a filmmaker to bring those experiences to the forefront of people's minds, whether it's like the stray dogs or the Native Americans who are taking part in this bison culling. I think I'm very interested in the perspective of those who have been marginalized or who find themselves at the bottom of these social hierarchies that have defined them as somehow lesser. Because I believe as a filmmaker, I want to show something about what I'm seeing in the world and perceiving. And and I think the view from the sidelines and the peripheries away from the centers of power can often be more accurate and representative of reality than if you're in the center of power and from the establishment, or if you happen to belong to a class of people who is very privileged or powerful.
Yeah, thank you. I have a just thinking of time. If anyone does have any questions, please do send them in the next few minutes. But I'm sure it's an inevitable question for you with Louise Houston. Do you do you still hear about Zaytan? I mean,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I actually, so this is a picture that somebody sent to me of, I don't know if you can see it. It's of Zaytan. It's of
Oh,
Zaytan, that she had filmed Zaytan independently. After seeing the film, she recognized Zaytan
ah.
from her own travel footage to Istanbul and the specific district, Karakoy, that Zaytan travels to. So Zaytan, I believe, as well in 2020, because we wrapped production in 2019. I haven't been able to be back, but Zeynep, my co-producer who lives in Istanbul, will often also send me uh, photos from her phone whenever she encounters Zaytan or the young men on the streets in their usual places. But so I was really worried about the stray animals during the pandemic because they survive off of the scraps of restaurants and cafes. And during the lockdown, what would they live on? But the government had stepped up and provided more food to the animals on a daily basis than they normally would have. And also volunteers stepped up. So, but which I wasn't surprised by at all, that
Mm.
based on what I had seen in Turkey and the way people really seem to care about the dogs. Like even when I tried to put those GPS tracking collars on the dogs, people would always come up to be really concerned, saying like, "What are you doing with this dog? Like you have no right to take them anywhere." So it felt very much like everybody was watching out for almost every single dog, even if they were anonymous.
Fantastic. And just a final question for you, because I'm aware you have to leave. Um, it something I love about this film is just how you can project so much of yourself onto this film and onto the narrator and the dogs that you see. But I do wonder, what do you hope that people will take away from this film?
I really wanted the film to, so I knew from the outset that there would not be narration or interviews, um, because I wanted space for people to just live with the dogs and be with the dogs and focus on mundane things like blades of grass that the dogs are sniffing, or really just be viscerally and physically with the dogs, just as, and also at their height, just as a way to, for the 72 minutes that you're watching the film, sort of step outside of your own human centric worldview, and to see the world from a slightly defamiliarized, non human gaze. Because for me, anthropocentrism, putting humans at the center of the world, is so destructive, has been so destructive to our planet. And so this film is this attempt, sort of orally and visually, to recenter a narrative around a being who doesn't have the privilege of being human in our world that's so hierarchical, but that hopefully the film shows how deep and rich every life is if you are able to just pay a little bit of close attention to it.
Oh, that's so lovely. Thank you. Thank you so much for that. I adore that. Well, Elizabeth, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you to everyone who's tuned into stream. Please do visit stray-dog.co.uk, which has got calls to action there if you're inspired. Please do watch the film. It's available to stream on virtual cinemas at the moment, and fingers crossed, proper cinemas when they open in May. We're crossing everything to be able to do that. And please follow the Bechdel Test Fest and Dogwoof for updates. And again, thank you so much, Elizabeth, for joining us today.
Thank you to everyone who watched the film and for your questions and this lovely conversation. And also, you can follow at Stray Dog Film to see occasional posts of people tagging their own dogs watching Stray. I'm always amazed that dogs can see the TV these days.
I'm going to go do that right now. That sounds delightful. But yes, thank you. Thank you so much for tuning in. And yeah, thank you and stay safe. And thank you to everyone for watching. Thanks so
Thank
much.
you.
Thanks.
Bye.